All right,
All right.
everyone, for joining us today for the second edition of the Low End Live, brought to you by the Los Angeles College of Music and Bass Magazine. We are your hosts today for this. We have Chris Jisi from Bass Magazine. We have Jerry Watts Jr., amazing player, and the bass chair of Los Angeles College of Music, bass head, I should say. And I'm the editor-in-chief of Bass Magazine, John Dioria. And today we're going to present to you our Bassist Producer Masterclass, which is a really important one because, as we've been talking about for the month leading up to this, there's just a wealth of bass players who also happen to be amazing producers. So we're very thrilled to have this topic on, and I'll kick it over to Jerry right now for a sec.
Yeah, thanks, John. I want to just join John and Chris and welcome everybody here. Yeah, we had an idea to do this a while back to kind of, in this unprecedented time, to give something back to the bass community and just create a place where we could kind of get together and have some community. We actually, our first episode was last month. We had a Pedals and Effects, and it was just fantastic. And we're so excited for today and for this amazing lineup of people. Hey, but before we start, we just want to give a shout out to our good friends Juan Alderete and Carrie Nordstrand. They've been having a bit of a rough year, so we're just sending you guys big love and continued recovery. And we hope to see you, on an upcoming episode real soon. And I think with that, why don't we jump right in?
Yeah, I love it. Of course, for if you are looking to further your bass playing and take it to the next level and have the opportunity to study alongside the amazing Jerry Watts Jr. right here, then go to lacm.org or edu to look into the classes and sign up for that. And for all things low end and bass, go to bassmagazine.com. We just released a new issue with Thundercat on the cover and a ton of new and great bass gear and players that we're covering. So go check it out now. And without further ado, we're going to bring on one of our panelists. We're thrilled to have him. You know him from hitting the stages and working with Beck for many years, 9 Inch Nails, Air, M83, Paramore, Jimmy Eat World, the amazing Justin Meldal-Johnsen. Thank you so much for being here, Justin.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be a part of this. Thanks.
Yeah, of course, man. So obviously it's been a very wild and unorthodox year, and you're someone who always has a lot of balls in the air as far as projects and things you're working on. How's it been for you kind of adapting to this lockdown environment?
I think like a lot of people, it started slow, and there was a transition period where things were up in the air and wasn't quite sure like how work was going to manifest itself, how it was just 2 months literally of being in complete stasis, and that was bizarre. It was really bizarre, but I have to tell you, like, you can't keep musicians down, and people want to work. And in terms of like doing sessions as a bassist, that's from then to now has been very sporadic, but I've been working on records nonstop since April or so,
Right.
So I feel very lucky that I've had that opportunity. I'm sure it's not necessarily the same for everybody, but somehow it worked out for me that I had projects lined up. So it's been cool. Along with anybody, there's also a dimension of, it's a bit difficult to balance being very creative and have that mental freedom, that kind of mental and spiritual zone of where you're separate from the travails of your life and family and stuff like that, and you can separate the two, and you get in the studio and you turn it on and you're working with artists, and so speaking personally, it's been an adjustment. It's been hard. There's sometimes when I feel the weight of various things that just affect all of us, and you don't feel creative on some days. You don't feel necessarily like you can bring your A game to something, and so that's something to reckon with and something to actually discuss. And luckily I have a lot of musician friends in the same boat, so you use that conduit to air that stuff out and problem solve and think with it. And, but overall, I feel really blessed because I've had a fairly steady stream of projects that have continued from a couple months after the start of the pandemic until now. So that's kind of my story.
Right. Now, with you were kind of talking about the 2 months straight of the very, severe lockdown. And I know a lot of musicians just took a minute to not even touch, their basses and their gear and just kind of were kind of sitting in the moment. Did you kind of experience that in what you were just speaking to? Did you kind of take some time to yourself to not be a producer or a bass player for a minute?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, just as a parent too, you're sort of like, oh, my kids are home. I have to focus on them and try not to get stuck in the news cycle, but to be aware of what's going on in the world to whatever degree and be responsible to whatever degree and take care of your family and just focus on that for a bit. So that was natural. That's natural for everybody, into your immediate family and your extended family. So there was definitely a lot of that. I wasn't really feeling creative. So I'll bet you that to a man, everyone on this panel will probably corroborate that, but that's at least how I would.
And what's it been like now that we've kind of been 1 foot in, 1 foot out here in the States, with precautions and how much we're limiting our activity. But as a working producer, you've kind of had to start venturing out and taking on projects. How did you approach that? You obviously have your own studio where you can do a whole lot of work in. But what's it been like kind of emerging back into a little bit of having to go work elsewhere and such?
It was a bit of a mystery as to how that would begin again, where you would go to a commercial studio or you take a meeting with someone else or you do a songwriting session across town with someone. So just gradually, it was just gingerly addressing it with people that you were working with and, should we do a day? And masks, right? Oh yeah, of course. And all right, well, let's just do that and we'll be distant and whatever. And I have to say, it's gotten a little lax at times. Like I had a band here for 5-6 weeks just now, and we all had I got tested and whatnot, but after a while it's sort of like we're in a tiny bubble. We go from our homes to our studio to my studio, and that's it. That's all that's going on. So there becomes a bit of like all right, well, we can be distant, but anyway, I'm sort of overstating the obvious, but yeah, it did take a while for people to figure out a protocol. But now, like, I'm working at Sunset Sound in Hollywood this week and next week, and everything's kind of back to normal. People just wear masks. I mean, it's cool. The music business will not stop. I mean, the only thing all of us are really having to reckon with is how our work as bassists, producers, reconciles with live work, because inevitably all of us on this panel and you guys hosting this panel, because we're all players, all of us have are staring down the barrel of what that all means, and it's confusing and it's vague, and there are mixed messages coming all the time that we're having to reckon with and figure out what's the right information or whatever, and I don't think any of us have a clue what's going on. So what do? We have to just fight for what we can do in our creative space, not speaking physically, speaking in terms of our creative capabilities, and get busy.
Right. Absolutely. That's great, man. Well, good. Well, I'm so glad to hear that you've been able to keep busy and stay safe. And of course, thank you so much for joining us. And we're going to bring on our next panelist right now. Now, he's an amazing player and producer. He's great on electric, upright, and synth. He has worked on, even if you're not entirely familiar with his whole body of work, you have heard everything this guy has done, from Dr. Dre to Eminem to 21 Pilots, Fiona Apple, Maroon 5, 50 Cent. I could go on for a very long time. We're very pleased right now to have Mr. Mike Elizondo here with us. Hey, Mike.
Hey, how's it going? I hope they haven't heard everything I've done, because there's a lot of bad stuff out there too. Thanks though for highlighting the good stuff.
It was hard to narrow it, man. The list just, you have to scroll to keep going down your discography, man. That's a good thing.
Man, yeah, I've definitely wound up in some places where you're like, how did I get here? And who did I trick into making them believe I could do this? But yeah, and there's been a lot of cool opportunities, and yeah, very, very blessed. And just tried to make the most of if somebody, even if I didn't think I could do a good job, I was just like, all right, well, I'm just going to show up and try and fake it, you know.
Exactly. We just had a comment from Peter who brought up Mastodon too, which is great because that's kind of very south of everything I just listed. So that kind of speaks to your diversity as a producer.
Well, yeah, I think that speaks to the 14-year-old in me. You know, I grew up like my first bass heroes were people like Cliff Burton and Steve Harris and you know, Geezer Butler. I mean, those were like my first, you know, heavy hard rock music was the music that spoke to me when I was 14 years old and wanting to learn how to play, you know, whatever Run to the Hills by Iron Maiden, you know. And so as I started to get opportunities to produce, there were a few bands out there that are like, man, it would be so cool to get to work with so and so and so and so, and some of the harder edged groups I had to convince because all they saw were my Dr. Dre and Eminem credits and didn't really realize that I had some knowledge of some, you know, some heavy metal and thrash metal music as well. So fortunately, Mastodon was one of those that gave me a shot.
And that album was superb as well. And big news with you, contrary to your hat and shirt being a lifelong Angelino, is that yes,
Always.
yeah, is that you recently made the hop back in 2019 to Nashville, which is big because you know forever such a staple in Los Angeles. What sparked the move for you to head out there?
There were a number of things. I'd been coming to visit and work in Nashville for about the last 10 years. And in the last 5 or 6 of those years, I started inviting, you know, my wife and my kids would come more often. And they loved it here as well. And, you know, there were a number of things that happened. There wasn't one particular thing, but I started to, you know, tried to visualize like what I wanted to be doing, you know, and how I wanted to be doing it and what kind of balance I wanted to have in my life. And you know, my wife and I would go back and forth talking about it. My kids are older now, so they had to be in on the conversation as well. And you know, we decided to go ahead and put our house up for sale in LA, and it sold in 2 weeks.
Wow.
And so we had to put things on the fast track, but you know, we love it out here. We kind of knew what we were getting into, but until you move to a completely new place, you don't really know, you know. So I feel like we're just we're starting to feel comfortable here. But you know, there's a lot of nice people out here, a lot of great musicians, obviously an amazing music scene, and a lot of diversity. So you know, it's COVID is kind of, you know, made it a little harder to meet a lot of people. But you know, it's been an amazing place though, even in the last year and a half that we've been here.
Absolutely. And so of course Justin, you know, was just kind of speaking on it, but how did, and you picked you know, moving out there in 2019 and then, you know, wanting to immerse yourself in the scene and then having COVID hit, how have you been adapting to the very restricted ways that us musicians have to find to do what we do?
Yeah, I mean, it was very similar story to what Justin said. I mean, when I was right in I had moved out here. I was fortunate enough to buy a recording studio on a piece of property that's not at my house, but it's about 10 minutes away.
Hmm.
And we had spent a few months getting that up and running. And you know, we powered everything up. I want to say it was like January 2nd. And, you know, I had a record scheduled and things were kind of, you know, looking like there was going to be a bunch of stuff back to back, which I was very grateful for. And then, yeah, it came, you know, once mid-February, March hit, it was very clear that we had to shut things down and bring everything to a grinding halt. You know, and then you just kind of, you're kind of trying to take everything in and figure out, you know, for me, it was making sure my wife and my kids felt okay. Because we're, you know, at that time, it still was a new location for us, a new environment. And now we're, you know, even more isolated from family and friends. And so, you know, definitely a lot of time spent just checking in with them and making sure they're okay mentally and spiritually and everything. And you know, and then little by little I started to, you know, start to feel those, you know, I guess the the desire to go and try and, you know, create something. And a lot of that it was very slow. Once I started, it was probably about a good 2 to 3 months before I started to feel like you know, I wanted to get back to work. And yeah, it was I've never had that stretch of time before dedicated to, to just sort of almost take inventory, and take inventory of my family and my work and what I'm doing and how I do it, and still trying to adjust.
Right. Oh man. Well, hopefully you're able to get back out soon enough and get into the scene, which Nashville is very rich in the bass world of amazing players. So I'm sure that day will come very soon.
Yeah.
Well, man, I'm so glad you're able to join us today, and we're going to bring on our next guest, who is just a legendary force in the music world and in the bass world and the production world. As a bass player, we're always proud that he's on our roster. From producing and working with Joni Mitchell, Herbie Hancock, Bob, Wayne Shorter. We have Larry Klein with us today. Larry, how are you doing?
I'm well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here with you guys.
Oh man, well, thank you so much for being here. So what has your 2020, that's kind of the topic of the year, of course, but what has your 2020 been like as far as having to adapt to everything?
Well, I was working on 3 different records actually when things went down, when the shutdown happened, and actually I was about to go, I think in the next week to London to do orchestra stuff at Abbey Road, and I had a lot of traveling and stuff in the works, and then of course everything just came to a grinding halt, and although I'd been reading about what was going on with this virus, and so I wasn't perhaps as surprised by what happened as other friends of mine were. In fact, I'd read a book called The Coming Plague by this woman, Laurie Garrett, about 10 years ago. And it sort of it predicted all this, everything that's gone down was in that book. And so I thought, uh-oh, okay, this is going to be bad, and so, of course, I think like most of us, when things just shut down, my first concern was making sure my wife and son were okay, and that things were negotiable, and then that we were, life, kind of working out how we were going to get through this whole thing. And so I didn't do a whole lot musically, I think, in that first little period. And the projects that I was working on, everybody just, stopped everything. Record companies stopped, everybody stopped. And so there was a period of adjustment, and then somehow I came to kind of a good place in myself about it. And I thought, well, let's see, this is like a big pause button being hit. And this is a chance for me to, I had kind of come to a place that I get to these junctures periodically anyhow. I'm sure we all do, but where I felt like, okay, I want to just break the palette and reassess things musically that I'm doing, kind of reconstruct the way I'm thinking about things sonically and otherwise. And so I in a way I thought, well, this is not that much different than periods of my life when I've just locked myself up and inside and listened to music and experimented and fiddled around with new software and different things, and played with some different architectural ideas about music and stuff. So I came to thinking about it like that, and it continues to kind of that's the positive part for me of all this, is that I think that if we use this time well that it's almost like, God, you know, we can look back on it and say, well, it was that little window where I realized some things about the way I was doing things that could evolve, and even about the way I was in other facets of my life, you know, and just the way that you deal with other people and the way that you deal with the world. And so while while it's been jarring and strange, it's also, there's been an upside. I mean, for me, I think it was maybe about a month after the lockdown and where everything shut, studios in LA started to open up again. I'm not sure exactly of how many weeks it was, but I live very close to Village in LA, Village Studios, and I work a lot there. I mean, I've spent probably a good portion of my life in that place, and they opened up at a certain point, and the guy who owns that, Jeff Greenberg, is a obsessive compulsive guy, and true to form, he when he opened back up, he had all the carpet was covered with plastic in a very precise way, and they had a very intricate protocol and very specific protocol to keeping the place safe to work in. And so I went back to work, and you know, I have my own studio in a guest house at where we live in West LA, and then I work quite a bit there, although I've worked at other studios during this period, but so things started tapering back into a state of activity where projects were moving forward, and actually up until very recently, in the last couple of weeks, I was finishing things that projects that I had in various states before this all went down. And but you know, in a certain way, I although I have to kind of remind myself actually to talk to people, you know, because sometimes I'll just, you know, I'll be working and listening to things and watching films and reading, you know, like sort of, you know, when I go into this kind of input mode, in this kind of construct that we're living in, it's easy to really go down the rabbit hole, and you kind of realize, oh, you know what? It might be a good idea for me to talk to some people. So this is a very welcome respite from you know, about a week or so I've had to just kind of be in creative mode, and aside from my son and my wife, just be locked up inside my head, you know. So this is great.
Well, man, I'm so glad that you're here, and that we get to be your people you get to talk to. So thanks so much for joining us, man.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I enjoy these things. I love talking with other, of course, in this case, very talented people about music.
Oh, man. Well, thank you for being here, and we're going to bring on another one of those very talented people. So he's very well known for his work with the trio, Matisyahu, Grizz, recently Danny Elfman, and the list goes on and on. He has some of my favorite bass tone in the whole industry. We're thrilled to have him today, Mr. Stu Brooks. Stu, how you doing, man?
Hey, John. Thanks. Hi, guys. Honored to be here amongst you. Things are going well. Thank you.
Nice, man. Now, short before, kind of like Mike was saying, short before this year and the COVID outbreak, you did a big move as well, where you were in New York for so long, where so much of your work and, you know, gigs and everything was. You even, you know, were just part of the Saturday Night Live band short before that. And then you kind of shifted coasts and moved out to LA, and then the lockdown hit. So what's that been like for you, kind of with the relocation and the year that we've had.
Yeah, my wife and I moved out here last year, and I had just been in the middle of an album cycle with Dub Trio's last record. We did a nice tour of the States, and then went to Europe and Japan, and finished in New York for New Year's. And then it was like, okay, that's it. And so January 2020, I was kind of looking at a little bit of the unknown, and excited to sort of start up my life as a bass player in LA. And a couple things came up that were very exciting, and I got deep into prep January and February, and some pre-production for Coachella started happening. And right, I guess like it was early March was when lockdown started, and a couple weeks before Coachella. And so when that wrapped up, it was quite a letdown. I gotta admit, well, because Indian Wells is next to Coachella, they had the Tennis Open there. That was the first event to go down because there was a case in Indian Wells, and so they cut that. And I was out in Palm Springs that day, and I was heading back home with my wife, and I was like, what's gonna happen? And sure enough, the next day they canceled Coachella, and just kind of shell shocked. But then as days went on, like my shell shock I gained a little perspective as to what was happening. Like, I don't have it too bad. I think, it was a few weeks later that I realized that people are dying, and so it's very serious. But I was, the letdown is real. So it took a little bit of time to adjust, and I put the bass down for a couple weeks. I did have some unfinished projects that that were in the works before that, and I tied up as many loose ends as I could, and then I started writing music for literally just for the fun of it, and started getting creative in the studio again. It took a while to get the bass going. I would play bass for 10 minutes a day, but I'd be in the studio all day, but sometime around late June, I was asked to go to Sonic Ranch in Texas and co-produce something with Paul Leary, who's a legendary guy. He formed the band Butthole Surfers, and just a legend. And I was struggling with passing up that opportunity, so I really had to figure out how to get there. And at that point, I had been quarantined for 2.5 months, and we were looking at flights, and I was like, oh man, I don't want to fly. So we drove out to Texas and got to do music with people in person. There was all controlled in a bubble and everything, and got to be next to people and be in a room and make music, and it was awesome. I forgot about the pandemic for about a week or so, and then we drove back. I saw you in Tucson. I stopped by and said hello, Janice and I, and then I started getting a little more brave and talking with friends in LA, and sessions were kind of happening. And so I took part in some writing sessions and different recording sessions, masked up and everything, but it was a little weird and intense, and not everybody was really respecting the risk as much as I was. And I was thinking oh man, I'm gonna bring this back to my wife. So I had a phase of being busy, going out and about, and at some point I just was like, I gotta stop. Then there was a session that came up later in the summer that required tests, and so which also required a quarantine before the test, and so then I locked down again, and adhered to that request and respect that very much so. And so I had a nice made a record with masks on for 10 hours a day. It was kind of intense, wearing a mask that long. but it's a sacrifice we're all willing to make. We're all taking a hit, and that got me back into practicing. I had a nice mission to practice for. I was like back to like 4 to 6 hours a day playing the bass and prepping for the session, and it renewed my purpose. You know, my existential crisis was like waning away, and so I feel like I'm back as a human being.
Well, good, man. I'm glad you're feeling back, and I'm even more glad that you're here with us tonight. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank
Stu.
you.
Of course, man. Now we're going to bring on our last panelist. He's worked with everyone from Etheridge to Sheryl Crow, Sarah Bareilles, Emmylou Harris. He's also teaching production at Los Angeles College of Music, the amazing Mark Browne. Mark, how are you doing?
Thank you, John, Jerry, everyone. It's great to be here.
Yeah, man. And so one question, and we were kind of talking about this leading up, in the week, is teaching production has to be a wild thing because it is kind of an ever evolving thing as far as the technology, the techniques, and all of that kind of stuff. How do you approach it necessarily, especially teaching a young generation that's pretty hip to everything that's coming up right now?
Yeah, I think you said it right there. I mean, the students that I've been exposed to, since I started, just bring so much with them. And so I would never feel comfortable teaching from, the you should do this or whatever, point of view. There are certain instances where you teach the technology, but, they bring so much art to the environment. You just never want to quell that. And that's the fuel. And it's, I'm just constantly amazed at how much we learn together. And I grew up, kind of peer taught. I went to schools, but I really learned so much from just, the people I was hanging out with. And to see that just happen naturally in a class environment is amazing. And it's really inspiring. There are days when, after a class, I would just, I would just have to dive in and try some of these concepts we were talking about, whether it was, and the new music, because it's everybody just procures the most amazing stuff. And I just can't get enough of it. It's really been so rewarding that I can't imagine not having it now. So.
Right. Absolutely. And now when you're kind of playing life and your working life as a player, you kind of took a turn from more, artists and bands and such, and started really focusing on scoring and, movies and television. How different was your approach, and what kind of sparked that change of direction for you?
It was an interesting thing because I grew up in Los Angeles, and it was during a time, the high school and my friends, it seemed like everybody's parent was in the music industry. I grew up with John Williams' family, Joe and Mark, and just everybody that was in my high school, it seemed like, so from the get-go, when I was really young, that was a possibility. And I certainly got involved in, recording and the publishing industry when there was, no one had home computers. And then, I always had this thought in the back of my mind that I really would love to write music for film or media. And, I love playing bass, and I love traveling and getting to play with all these, great artists. And, after, 18 years of touring, someone called me and said, "Hey, you're good with this sort of stuff. Well, you want to jump in on this?" And I just said yes, and I dove in. And fortunately, the person that kind of brought me into the scene, extremely patient, and just, kind of helped me understand a lot about what it means to be a composer in media. And because you have a lot of chefs, it's really a team effort, because you've got, your director and, showrunner, production people, and stuff like that. And a lot of the times they're part of the decision process of what that music is going to be. And it was just really fun. And it just happened where the person I was playing with, she was going to take a break, and it just worked out. And I said, if I don't do this now, I don't think I'll ever have the chance, because my daughter was the right age, and there was always this thing when you would leave town, you'd think, oh shoot, I'm gonna miss out on so many recording projects and stuff like that. It just kind of happened where it was like, oh yeah, and I fell in love too. That was another thing that really, that I just met someone and I said, everything just kind of lined up. So, it was a big shift, but now I think, wow, if I had missed that, it would have been really a bad call to miss that. So.
Absolutely. So that's a lot of hats between player, producer, teacher, scorer, and so many other things. And we're going to get into all that right now. So thank you so much, Mark, for joining us on this. And so now we're going to bring on the full panel and get into talking some shop. But first, we're going to send it over to Jerry for a quick announcement.
Hey, thanks, John. Yeah, I forgot to mention our friends at Kala, the U-Bass folks, have given us a bass to raffle away. So sort of towards the end of this roundtable, we'll announce the winner. And a special shout out to Joe DeMars and Michael Upton at Kala for being so cool with us. We sure appreciate that. Yeah. Okay. Here we go.
Yeah, we're going to get into some roundtable. If you want to spotlight all of our panelists, and Chris, you want to sling the first question out that we have for these fine fellas?
I'm looking at the list, and of course, there's the cliche question: why do bass players make good producers? And I'm like, oh, I don't want to throw that at those guys just yet. So maybe I'm going to throw a curve and ask this one: how do you ensure that the music you're producing is the artist or band's vision more than your own?
Feel free, anyone to foster that one.
You certainly talk less and listen more. I think that you have to spend a lot of time with people in order to get inside their creative headspace before you are pushing the record button, and just check yourself and make sure you're not trying to inflict your own aspirations for what you think they might be good at on top of their own aspirations. Just try and separate that. There can be some times where you feel really eager to jump in and I don't want to say manipulate, because that's way too strong, but you want to try stuff for them that may not be in their wheelhouse. And that's cool to a degree, but what you need to do is you have to make safe spaces that people feel entirely uninhibited. And that's a really tall order, because nobody feels entirely uninhibited, right? That's a bit, it's almost wishful thinking, but it's the infinite goal of how do you get someone to feel entirely themselves, uninhibited, safe, creative, and flowing as best you can, considering the circumstances. So that's what you're trying to do. So if you're thinking about that more, my opinion is you're always going to end up with a better result. I'd love to.
I would add. Oh, sorry, Larry. Why don't you go?
Well, I was just going to say that that for me, when I meet an artist before where we're thinking about working together, I try to assess whether that person or the people involved are curious about things, curious about where they're going and how they're going to get there, and what how they perceive music, how they think about music, these kind of things, and of course, at the same time, I'm trying to think, how much of a kindred aesthetic, how much common ground do we have here? And so by the time the project starts, I usually have a pretty good feeling about, or sort of, I've got a lay of the land to some extent anyhow, about this, because for me, that's a key thing. I mean, I approach every experience, every record, every session, anything with, you know, I want to learn something as well as hopefully help the people that I'm working with or the person that I'm working with get to and beyond where they're hoping to go. But I think that when you have that kind of mutual curiosity and desire to investigate things, as opposed to sort of exercise your vision or your, you know, put your mold on something or your stamp on something, that kind of helps a lot, I think, to achieve what Justin was talking about, that kind of atmosphere of trust and okay, you know, let's figure this out, you know, let's go somewhere, you know, as opposed to this is how I think we should do this, and this is how we're going to get there. You know, I that kind of atmosphere coming from anyone, I think, is counterproductive. If it's coming from me, if it's coming from the producer, it's ignoring who the artist is. And if it's coming from the artist, for me, I kind of feel like saying, well, you should just do this. You know, I don't know if I even do I need to be there? Do you need someone there? I don't know, you know. Sorry, Mike,
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Oh, no. It's fascinating to hear. I mean, I think for myself too, it's you know, when you have those earliest conversations with the artist or the band, and you're trying to find out like how, when they're not in the studio, how do they write their music? How do they create their music? What makes them comfortable? And I try and make those first steps in the studio sort of just the easiest transition from, you know, are they writing their songs in a garage somewhere? Or are they sitting, you know, behind a laptop, you know, putting tracks together? Whatever their process is, I try to make the beginning of the studio process when I'm joining up with them, you know, the most familiar environment that they're used to, just to sort of get them to sort of open up and loosen up. And you know, one of the things too that always makes me a little nervous is when you start having those conversations about, you know, just where the songs are coming from, and if the artist doesn't have, you know, sometimes it's hard for them to express, which I get, but there are times where you can tell like they just have no idea what they want to do. And that makes me a little nervous at first, because then that tells me maybe they're possibly leaning on me to give them the answers, and I don't know, I feel like that can be a slippery slope. So I always try and pull as much out of them. You know, some people have no problems communicating the vision that they have for their music. Other people, you kind of have to sit with them and pry it out of them over time. But ultimately, the more, you know, I'm constantly trying to pull from the artist, and I try to, as little as possible, you know, just do what I want to do. I'm always trying to like, well, what do you think about this, and what's going to get them excited, and what, you know, at the end of the day is something they're going to be proud of, and not just feel like I just sort of dragged them to the finish line, but I sort of was, you know, pushing them and helping them get to the finish line first.
Yeah, they've got to live in the house, right?
Right. Yeah. Hopefully for many years. Yeah.
Yeah, trust is such a big part of it. I think, Justin, when you said, you know, creating a safe place, you know, that's, I remember working with this one artist, and she came into the studio, and I could just sense that she was intimidated by, you know, all the gear and the, you know, whatever was going on technically. And there was just kind of, I could just feel her just sort of, it was subtle, but she just was not comfortable. And I just said, you know what? I've got this laptop, and I've got, you know, a small rack and a bunch of stuff. Let's go out to your house where your piano is, where you wrote all these songs. And I kind of submerged into her environment with the dogs and the, you know, just, and suddenly it became like she got so much more comfortable. And it was really fun being invisible and just, you know, just kind of letting her do, you know, sit at the piano where she wrote all these songs, and surrounded by, you know, so many things that inspired the songs, heartbreak, whatever, her pets and stuff. You kind of had to work around that. But that was really fun. And it taught me a lot about that chemistry, about, you know, it's not about the gear. It's about, you just inspiring and if just being as invisible as possible and let that be the first, and most obvious, thing that sort of evolves. And that was really fun. And now I'm, it's fun going to places like other cities. Like I did almost a whole project just in a hotel room because the city just had a really cool vibe, and we had to work around the din of the city and stuff like that. But it was just such an interesting thing that where yeah, you just try to become invisible or maybe just kind of fold into their routine.
Yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, it's sort of, you have to be able to read the room.
Yeah.
And make very, be very perceptive and just sort of see, just read someone's body language. Sometimes they might not even feel comfortable saying something. You have to be able to read that room and figure out ways to create someplace comfortable for them.
Yeah, just
And
to
that's
add,
the-
to add
oh,
to
go ahead.
that,
Go ahead, Steve.
like in preliminary discussions, you could just find out how much creative input they want from you, and then like putting them in their own environment where they can, like you went to her house and she played on her piano where she wrote the songs and stuff. You can get a good sense of their initial intention, whether it's coming across or not, but you might get a little hint of it. And then you could bring that vision to fruition, perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, one of the strange things about the job of the producer is that it's amorphous, and it's I mean, one of the great things, the things that I love the most about it, one of the things is that it changes with every person that you do it with. It's a different thing, and you walk into a situation and one person might have no idea what they want to do about anything, almost, maybe maybe it's a person who sings and they've got some songs, but they're not really sure about even those songs. Are they the right song? I mean, and you have to almost be an auteur in a way in that kind of situation. Of course, you've got to sort of, spot the flame inside that person, and then, okay, how can I make this thing that I see there take up the whole picture, or almost the whole picture, and then the next, you might be, the next time you do it, you might be with someone who has too many ideas even for a project, and you have to sort of sit back and say, okay, my role here is let me filter through this stuff and find what of these ideas forms something that has continuity and character and something that'll serve this person well, but it's always it really is like this sort of mysterious job in order to do it well, because you, like Mike's saying, you have to read the room, you have to read the person and see, okay, what do they need? What do how can I build something with this person that's going to serve them and move everything forward for them, and also make something that I love at the same time.
That's really well stated. I just want to, on the back of that comment, I just want to say that everyone is basically, so far we've talked about essentially the same issue, which is it's the trust thing, and it's also the fact that the job, the parameters of the job and the functions of the job and what you're doing in the studio is not it's not pattern based or a to-do list or anything. It just can't be. And it never is. Mark was touching on that too, and Stu and everything. It's like you have to divine their intentions even though sometimes the things they say, the artist or the band or whatever, aren't actually the things that it's not that, do you know what I'm trying to say? It's sort of like you need to pull from them. You need to extract stuff that's important for you to get a picture of your own, and you use that as your guidepost. And in a way, as a producer, you're sometimes, to a degree, throwing out everything that you just did on your last project.
Yeah. I love that. I love doing that.
By necessity, you don't really have a choice, because you were just working with a singer-songwriter who's very extremely musical and does their own arrangements, and it's very sophisticated and it's all put together and whatever. And then you're working with a band that's never been in a recording studio, and they just like it's like punk in a garage or whatever, or like, you know, and that's just the name of the game. So you might have certain things that make the foundation of like maybe some of your working processes and stuff like that, but you have to be prepared to throw so much of that out and almost reinvent yourself every time. That's why the cliche of you're always learning or like whatever, it's a cliche because it's extremely true for the producer, maybe more than everybody. You're always learning and adapting.
Absolutely. If you're doing the job well, you're always learning. Absolutely.
So yeah, so Larry and Justin just kind of played into this. This is something Chris and Jerry and I talked about a lot this week. It's kind of an impossible question. I'm sure it's different case to case, but when do you know that a song is done, and when do you know that an album is done? I know that there are deadlines with record labels and such, but you can always go back and put another guitar layer on. You can always put another synth layer. You can tweak stuff. Maybe this sounds different. How do you guys know? Like this is the song and this is the album? When is the stopping point for you guys?
I mean, I think for me, you know, music has always been the lens that I feel and see the world through, and you know, when I've thought about, okay, this exact question, it's I mean, what, you know, it comes down to, what do you look to music to do for you, right? What do we look, when we put a record on and listen to, what are we looking for? And to me, it's you're looking for yourself to feel something intensely, right? So that's my compass, and I'm always trying to steer towards, okay, what is gonna make me feel this song and make it reach into me and grab my heart, you know, and grab me in some kind of really strong way. And so that guides my whole process of everything. And I guess addressing what you were saying regarding how do you know you've added enough, or how do you know not to add another guitar part or another thing? I find myself taking stuff out.
Yeah.
I try. I'm much more often. I come to a certain point in the evolution of a record, and I just think, what is this doing? This is not doing anything. Okay, out, bye. You know, and I'm just merciless about that. I could have worked for 3 days trying to get something to work, and if I wake up one day and think, this is not doing anything, this is not serving a purpose in there, you know, I'll turn to the artist and say, let's lose this. You know, this is crap. You know.
Yeah, I totally, man, I love what you just said, Larry. I mean, it makes so much sense. I think, you know, as a producer, really, you're kind of, you know, when I first became aware of what a producer does, you know, I was a session bass player, getting to play on records by T-Bone Burnett and you know, Glenn Ballard, and, you know, so many amazing, you know, producers. And I'm like, okay, now I'm finally getting to see somebody hands-on do this, you know, and I'd kind of watch them and I'd go back to some of these records that I loved growing up. And I think, you know, my gut is just sort of has been formed over many years of my favorite music and my favorite records, and like Larry was saying, how those records made me feel. So as a producer, I'm maybe not in a very specific way, like, oh, I want this song to sound like this song, but in general, I want to be able to listen to a song and have it feel the way it did when I listened to my favorite records growing up. And so many of my favorite records growing up were not piles and piles and tracks of music. It was doing the most with the least amount of tracks. And so, you know, I'm always leaning on like, okay, what are the least amount of instruments we can have on this to have the most impact and to convey the most emotion, and to make sure that nothing is stepping on that vocal, because the vocal at the end of the day is what's going to make or break it. All the other stuff is definitely great and supportive, but if you have too much stuff in there, so I'm always trying to lean on just trying to have the least amount of stuff to have the biggest impact, and just kind of trust my gut. This is making me feel excited, even though I've listened to it, you know, probably 1,500 times in the last 5 weeks. Am I still getting excited? And then at some point, if you start to feel like things are getting too convoluted, don't be afraid to just mute that last track or those last 5 things you thought were going to be so important. Don't be precious about any of it. Even if, you know, sometimes the thing that took you 5 minutes to record, you know, or something that took you 5 hours to record, you might think, oh man, but we got to keep that. We spent so much time getting that guitar to sound a certain way or the drums to feel a certain way. If it's not working, you gotta just let it go and move on.
Yeah, it gets revealed when I work. You know, when you write music for media and there's dialogue and other components, it's a shared space. And I had to learn quickly to understand that dynamic where sometimes the very, very simple gesture really supports something so much better than over composing and you know, it's amazing how many times, you know, I'll write something and I'll think this is just right, and then you put it with dialogue and, you know, the other components, and you're just like, wow, it's not right. It's just I've overpopulated this little village, and you start thinning things out, and it just teaches you this lesson of, you know, that emotional efficiency that sort of happens. And it's like, I can't learn that enough over and over again. And it's amazing listening to the records that I thought were hundreds of parts, and then, you know, you listen to them, you're like, wait a second, that's always just been bass, drums, and, you know, whatever, and you're just like, wow, you know. So, you know, yeah, it's about emotion and yeah, economy and efficiency, I think.
I just want to say that the stuff that you guys have said just now about that is incredibly spot on. I aspire to that, and I fail at it sometimes. And in those failures, I find, oh, hold on, maybe I really like maximalism. Maybe that's just something that I really enjoy, when you have this critical mass of 40 guitars and like everything's bending and the vocals buried and the, you know, so I just want to make a little shout out to the idea that sometimes this is actually to compliment what these gents have all said.
Yeah.
Sometimes there's a function, there's an artistic function and aesthetic choice where having things be like non-dynamic and just compressing the speakers because there's so much information and the vocals it's literally a potential choice that could be really alluring, especially if maybe on an album there's 8 other songs that have a different approach. I don't know, I'm just throwing that out there. There's just an interesting way to look at it.
Or if you have a section
yes,
that is just massive,
yeah,
and then fall off a cliff into nothingness, you know, those kind of things can be so effective to, you know, that kind of contrast. I worked, one of my best friends growing up is a composer and a great keyboardist, and we used to always, when we went to music school together, he used to laugh. He said, "You're a minimalist. I'm a maximalist." and we came to later do a record where I was producing, and it was really his project, and we really got to experiment a lot with that kind of high contrast kind of thing of because we had to find a way to dovetail our aesthetics, But I agree. I think that something being just overwhelming and pinning you to the wall can be an amazing feeling.
Yeah, if it's called upon, it's just another device in your set of tools.
Awesome. So we'll wrangle it back a little towards the world of bass, since we have a bunch of bassists and producers here. Obviously, it's a case-to-case kind of thing as far as how you're going to go about tracking. It's different from electric to upright to synth to what they're going for. But do you guys have kind of a preferred or secret sauce method of tracking bass that's just been kind of tried and true for you guys?
Stu Brooks, talk
Stu,
to
you
us.
gotta hop on this.
Yeah.
Stu.
All right.
Tell us
Yeah.
your
Stu.
secrets.
I don't have one set of guidelines per se, but like every situation is different. But I tend to bring a pedal board, a P bass, and maybe a jazz bass or an alternate bass that's interesting, like an EB2 or I don't know, something that might work well for the project. With the pedal board, I have a splitter with a buffer that will then send a clean signal entirely to another channel and then a separate channel to effects. And that way it's kind of non-committal on the effects side, but also you could also blend them well, like the clean and the effects need to have freedom to be adjusted by the mixer. And because sometimes the clean stuff will actually enhance the effects. So with that said, I would take a clean signal from the pedal board to maybe like a tube sound, a tube DI, and then maybe take the effects to a solid state thing, and then maybe another channel, another split that goes to an amp. But it depends on the production, depends on the scenario. Sometimes I'll just show up with the tuner. It's nice to have some options when you're there. So like the pedal board might have some like distortion stuff or synthy stuff or dynamics or modulation. And if the session calls for it and you could sense that there's a creative openness, maybe you suggest a couple things once you let's just say I would try to be as well prepared and get the first take and nail it. And then, okay, let's do another one just so you have a comp and maybe it's a little more dialed in. And then the third one could be like up an octave or like a more busy take or a fun take or whatever, the magic. And then once you're like, okay, I did my job, why don't we check out this crazy pedal? You might love it. I don't know. Try to have fun with it and promote a fun environment. What was the question?
You got it. All right.
That's
Who
good.
else is gonna hop on that?
I like being a chameleon. It's really interesting. I think, if you get to know the song in the first few moments, some ideas start happening. So I never, I take a boatload of stuff to the studio when I get to, and that's fun for me. Some people I know just plug into this. That's all I want. But if you explore other bases, they kind of ask for something. I know if I'm doing something with the hollow body bass, that just by experiencing and experimenting, I know that's going to sound really good through this signal chain and stuff like that. So I try to think like that, but I'm always willing to be surprised, because the other day I forgot what the occurrence was, but I didn't have what the usual tools that I take, and I ended up going through this little amp that was just not intended to be, the amp to be used, and it sounded amazing. And it was like, okay, there it is, just be ready to, if you listen to the song, sometimes what's in that song will kind of direct you to an idea, and maybe, so my answer is bring it all on. It's if you have imagination and you're willing to be a bit of a chameleon, that's really fun for me. I love finding new stuff with stuff that it's never been plugged in together, so.
Totally. One of my favorite sessions that I ever did, it had an amp that was mic'd. I believe it was a Fender 15, and it was broken. And that being mic'd, like the sound of the amp, like almost like falling apart, and the intensity that gave was like one of my favorite sounds. And I'm always like, if I'm playing somebody this song, I'm like, dude, check out the very end. You could hear the broken cabinet. It's very subtle, but it's like so satisfying to have been like skeptical at first, and then being like, well, whatever, let's go for it. At least we have the dry channel and we have the effects channel. We can use this or not, but just being open to new gear and new methods, is very important.
I think for me, the only constant is that if I think back in all, not only things that I'm producing where I'm playing bass, or things that I'm just playing bass on, is that I always take DIs with me, because like a really good DI, it drives me crazy playing through a bad DI, and it's sort of it just feels like an insurmountable obstacle to me over the years, but other than that, I think I have no constant. It's like I guess you guys have said to some extent, that it depends on so many things, the artist, the music, sort of what you're feeling that particular day, how you're feeling about music. I think that everything you listen to affects you, like in some way or another, like you hear, or even everything you absorb, a film you see affects you, and at least for me. And so I might wake up on a particular day and grab 3 different basses that I think, okay, this is going to cover some interesting ground, or bring a ton of stuff, or one bass. I guess for me, I'm mainly interested in sort of, and this is not just bass, but everything is things that lie in between other things, or things that sound like something like an old sound, but like perhaps a strange dream of an old sound or something,
Mm-hmm. Love that. Yeah, I mean, my approach is similar to Stu, I think. And if I'm playing on someone else's record, at a studio that's not my own, I always like to just make sure I have a DI that I trust. And I usually just try and, suggest that they have a clean DI, and then a DI with the effects, and then an amp. And then sometimes the amp is going to sound great with the effects too. And maybe I'll suggest that, and I'll kind of, make sure that they have options if they want to, if they, they might not like what they got that day from the amp. And so at least they've got the DI and they can reamp it to something else, on a technical level. That always seems to be helpful. And then if I'm in my own space, with my own toys, it's kind of sky's the limit, really no rules. And, I'll run anything through anything just to sort of see what happens. And I think a lot of it starts with sort of something that I might be hearing in my head, you know, my own imagination of like, okay, what might get me that sound? Oh, okay, yeah, that bass and maybe this pedal plugged into that, and we'll get not only a bass amp, but we'll also run it through, you know, an old, you know, beat up, you know, Supro amp as well or whatever, and just kind of, I don't know, just kind of try and find what it is that you're hearing in your head and experiment. And, you know, there's been times where I did a demo, you know, I do plenty of demos where I'm just using an amp simulator in Logic, you know, and I'm trying, and I find myself making the record and trying to beat it, and all I'm trying to do is basically recreate something that is already cool, you know, and so I'll just say, all right, well, it's okay, I have no shame as long as it sounds great. I really don't care, you know. So I think sky's the limit.
Yeah, I want to jump on that, dude, because that's such an important thing. There's a little bit of a fixation on gear, sometimes from players who are coming up or like trying to play sessions or whatever. Like, oh, I gotta have this thing or whatever. And then you, as the years go on, you realize how little it actually matters, because you'll generally just figure out some cool way to get the right sound in the circumstance, you know. But it is cool to have a lot of tools. So you know, backing up what Mark was saying, I'm also a bit of a chameleon, and I like to have as much as I can there. It's not really a matter of being prepared. It's more a matter of like, well, how far can I stretch it? You know, I bring too many pedals and too many instruments and amps and stuff. But again, like what you're saying, Mike, look, when I'm in my own space, sky's the limit, and it doesn't really matter. I'm happy to like get a bass sound and with like an amp simulator or whatever, or like a lot of times I'll use DIs and do things with them that are really like not okay. Like one of my favorite things to do, one of my secret weapons, is to run a DI and not reamp it per se, but send it over to my ARP 2600 over in the corner. And it, as a lot of you know, it's got the sickest spring reverb and crazy sounding speakers, like a Whirly or something. It's super shitty and special. And then you mic that up with a pair of 57s, and the reverb's out of phase and it's weird. And then all of a sudden, oh, that's your bass sound. And I don't know, stuff like that. Like sky's the limit. Just try stuff. Have fun with it. Don't get too like rigorous about, you know, you need the most immaculate B15 and the perfect, you know, 59 P-bit. You don't necessarily need that shit. You can get a lot with whatever you have, you know.
But it helps.
Oh yeah. It does.
Absolutely. So you guys have worked and on so many albums and you know, have so much experience in the studio. I'm sure you guys have learned so much from the first album you guys worked on to this point in your careers now. But kind of digging deeper to that, do you guys have like a nightmare studio experience, whether it was lost tapes, deleted hard drives, artists very difficult to work with? What's kind of your nightmare moment you've had as a bass player or producer, and how did you overcome that?
I gotta start. I have a terrible one. Okay. Oh my God. Okay. So, circa 96, 95, 96, Beck said to me, like, I want to get a home studio going or whatever. So I like spec'd out like a Pro Tools system for him when it was like whatever, 8 tracks or 16 tracks. It was pretty minimal. And so we did, and I learned how to use it on the fly. No, we didn't know what we were doing. We just had all this gear, and I had a 1176 and a decent microphone in Pro Tools. And we're trying to make some demos for a new record. And we did a week's worth of work that was lost. A week. Because of an improperly formatted hard drive that also then had some mechanical issue, and we still talk about it. And it was no one's fault per se, but it was like a week, a week.
It's sad.
All right, I need to hear someone else's terrible story to make me feel better.
Well, I have, my story was more as an observer first, and then as a producer later. But I remember doing a session once with a drummer who will go unnamed, but this was the last song on a 2-week long session, and there was this one song where it had a 6/4 bar, and he needed to start his drum fill on beat 5 and 6 of a 6/4 bar, and he was wanting it to make it a 4/4 bar, and he couldn't get it. And literally 20 takes in, you start hearing a little zing, zing, zing. I was like, "What's that sound?" It was him taking his cymbals off of his his drum stand, and he basically was telling the producer, "You need to call someone else. I'm not your guy." And it was like great vibes for the whole 2 weeks, and everything was amazing. And it was the last song, and he literally just walked out of the session, and that was it. And we all looked at each other like, well, there's nothing else we can do. Well, fast forward about maybe 6 years later, I'm producing a record, and I hired this same drummer. And we're working on a song, and I don't know what it was, but he just got into his own head, and he started to psych himself out. And we were tracking, and I realized things were going a little south. So I said, let's just take a break, and we'll come back to this in a little bit. And then after about maybe 20, 30 minutes, we come back, it was me and the artist, and this was just we were just overdubbing drums. And I'm like, okay, yeah, let's go ahead. And we couldn't find the drummer, and turns out he bailed. He left right as we were trying to get this whole thing worked out. And needless to say, it was the last time I ever hired or played with this guy. And it's too bad. It was just one of those things. So some people just have a limit, and once they go too far, it is what it is.
Well, I have a story that is particular to the medium of using tape, and from that time before Pro Tools or anything, and there was a point at which Joni and I were working on a record, and we had built a studio in a part of the house that we were living in, and so we had an assistant who was this was toward the latter part of this record, and we were just doing detail work on a track, and the assistant, who will go unnamed, went to line up the machines, and the tones that we were working with on that particular record were at the head of the reel of one of the songs. And so the assistant did the record pad, which was always with tape, you have to have that area that your record pad is done on. And then it's almost always separated at the very least by a really sizable amount of leader, so that you don't go into anything else when you're doing your record levels.
I wonder where's this story going? I wonder what's going to happen.
It's so hard to tell, right? Well, she we had these Atari machines, and she was down low, and she didn't hear the thing go over the island of leader, and went about 25 seconds into the master. And so the record has the rough mix that we that we had before that, because it was a fatal mistake, and we and we just lost stuff that there was just no way to get back to. So that was probably the worst thing that I've ever had happen.
Has anyone ever had it happen where someone is like transposed, and they can't hear can't hear the pitch?
Oh yeah.
It's happened to me a couple times.
Yeah, or 432 or something like that. And
yeah, that's right.
And everyone's getting really upset and angsty about why is it sounding?
Session, it was all very dissonant already, like a punk noise thing, and he was at 432, and I couldn't figure out what notes he was playing. It Insane. Maybe insane. It sounded like a nightmare.
I had an inspired moment where it was like, oh, we definitely have to put this large tube, large diaphragm condenser as an overhead, and something didn't get tightened down, and oh man, I'll tell you, we had to take like a 45-minute break with ice and because the drummer was right there, doing what drummers do, getting ready to and I'm hovering above him on the stool with the mic, and I thought it was attached pretty well, and I turned away, and by the time I got to the control room, it was like I nearly lost a friend right there.
Oh my God.
But no, everything was okay.
How was the
swelling
mic?
did go down. So. And it's interesting because the mic bounced off the off the snare head, and it was a soft landing. So looking back on it, I'm very fortunate, and every time I see Matt, I always go, remember, and then I go, no, don't bring that up. That's not a good. Anyway.
Has anybody else ever worked with an artist who was committed to this idea that 432 is some sort of a I just did and worked for the director, and it was really great, but they had they made the decision that I really want harp on this, and I kind of I was talking to a contractor and really trying to work out who was a harpist that was available and someone who understood the kind of, it was a pretty modal eccentric composition, and that just doesn't go well if you play harp or other instruments. And it was it was really quite a challenge, and I had to kind of be as diplomatic as possible and trying to say, hey, look, this is going to be hard, and you can't just tune a harp like that. It just doesn't work out. So yeah, but it's the people that really believe in that. I mean, I wish I had more time to explore that, because it was really interesting. They were firmly believing that it's about something larger than your Roland tuner. It's a lot. And on the heels of that session, an arranger friend of mine sent me this incredible, it's a recording that someone put together of different snapshots of the opening of Beethoven's Fifth, but recorded, the first one started in 1910, and then it went all the way forward to modern times to demonstrate the variation in tuning and tuning tolerance in an orchestra over time. And it's just, it was amazing. Because somewhere around 1928, something happened, and it was like, and it was definitely not, no digital tuners, no, other references, but it was really interesting how concepts of tuning tightness, and particularly in large ensemble, it just really and I'll have to say, there are certain instances I wish we could go back to the late 50s. There were some Leonard Bernstein recordings and stuff that were in this sort of, it was 10 seconds. I really need to find it again, because it was just one of the most, and it was always da 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 da. It was only that on this tape, but just completely different eras. And just listening to, some of them were so out. They were just like, what? And renowned orchestras, not youth orchestras. It was like big Berlin symphonies and stuff.
Oh, you guys, that's amazing. By the way, I have to tell you one more while it's on my mind, and I'll be super quick about it. Okay,
please.
This is insane. I was doing a session where I was the bass player for the Muppet movie, which was really fun, because I got to play like Rainbow Connection and shit, like all those classic jams, and it was really fun. Except there's one song that we're doing where I was given a chart, and I'm reading the chart, and the people on the session were probably of a higher caliber than me. It was like Jim Cox on piano, and George Deering, and like it was crazy. It was like a really heavy session, right? And I felt like I had to be on my toes. I don't normally do sessions of that, I don't know, that whatever, that level. And we started playing the song, and I kept playing it, and I would start it, and the bass sounded funny and whatever, and so just kind of keeping quiet. I was trying to, am I reading this wrong? Okay, there's the key. Okay, good. Blah blah blah. Not the best reader, and I kept trying it, and it kept sounding like horrible, and I'm just turning red. I'm like shrinking into my chair. And I'm trying to hold it together and figure out, like, listen as best I can, like change my mix, like what's going on. And Jim Cox, the pianist, screamed at me, and he was like, "Justin, that's not the song. You're reading the wrong chart." Anyway, everyone was freaking out, and I'm getting cursed out by Jim Cox, and everyone's losing their minds, right? And it turns out I was reading a draft chart of the thing that the copyist person didn't give me a chart. I was reading the wrong chart, and it had been changed immensely. Tempo, well, not the key, but the part. Anyway, it was insane. I felt so, I don't know. You guys all must have some crazy story of when you're at a session where it's really intense like that. And for me, that was like the most miserable, terrifying moment I've ever had. But when that resolution came, the relief was just, oh yes, you know.
Yeah.
So
Sorry,
I've got a good one.
No.
I've got a last one, and this was a long time ago. I think I was probably around 22 years old or so, and I was playing on the score for Raging Bull, the movie Raging Bull, and I was Robbie Robertson was the music. I guess you'd call the music coordinator or something on this, or sort of. It was a mixture of underscore and different kind of incidental music that happens in the context of the movie. And I was playing with Garth Hudson playing piano, and Richard Manuel was playing drums. And we were the trio in the Copa Cabana in the scenes where Jake LaMotta's, coming in, and he's getting crazier and crazier and jealous. And so we were playing, I think T for Two or some kind of, very mundane standard. And we're playing along, and we're the band in the scene. And I'm playing, and I was pretty, I felt pretty overwhelmed that I was playing with these two guys who were big time heroes of mine. And all of a sudden, I just heard this cacophonous kind of sound, and I thought, wow, am I having a stroke or something, or what's happening? And I looked over at Garth, and he just segued into another song in another key, and I looked over at him. His eyes were kind of rolled back in his head, and he just went out. He was gone. And
awesome.
But that was the feeling of that was so strange, because at first I thought, shit, I forgot something. I'm messing up big time here.
Guys, staying on the frivolous side, I just have to ask this one. When there's another bass player on the session, are you professional? Obviously, you're listening to the bass in context, but are you aware of that? Are you maybe overly cautious because you don't want to vibe the guy? What's sort of the play when there's another bassist on the session? Is your ear always going to be a little to that just because you're bass players?
Maybe, but it's also, I think after a certain number of records, you start to not really focus on it as much, and you definitely want to make them comfortable. So you're not like being that sort of presence over your shoulder.
Yeah, I don't know. It depends too. There's definitely been plenty of times where I'm working with a really young band, and maybe bass player who's could be my kid, and so there's definitely been times where if they ask for tips on something, like I just try and make them feel comfortable and try and just make sure that they're excited. But there's been times where they'll pull me aside and say, hey, I'm trying to work out this thing on my bass, and can you give me some pointers? And I'll charge them a little extra on the side, for some bass lessons. And no, but for me, it's a lot of fun, when you get like young 19, 20-year-old bass players in there, and they're just so fresh, and they're learning, and they want to absorb so much about the experience and how can they get better at this. And to me, that's always an extra bonus. But I always feel like there's a reason why that bass player is in that band, and there's a chemistry that happens within the other musicians, and you just focus on that and try and get the best version of that.
Yeah, I think that I mean, there are times when I work on records where I feel like I need to have someone else playing bass, where it might be because the artist is insecure in a way where I feel like I've got, in order to give them what they need and to be able to get to solutions quicker, that it would be easier for me to have someone else play bass. And so I think I try to get players who I know well and who I know think to some degree the way that I do about the instrument, and also who are patient, with having someone. I'm very circumspect if I'm working with another bass player, but I've got pretty specific opinions about note length and different, when you come to this, can you make this transition feel more natural by playing this long, this short, this long, and these kind of things. But that's kind of for me is an issue sometimes. I don't know about you guys, but sometimes I'll opt not to play because I feel like my head's going to explode if I do. It's just too many things to think about.
Absolutely. Same thing. If I have a chance, I'd really actually rather not play bass. Really.
Yeah, it's a wonderful perspective to kind of hang back and just sort of take the whole thing in, and then always that moment when someone plays and you just like, gosh, I wish I thought of that. Did I think of that?
Yeah,
obviously, and that's great. I mean, boy, I'll tell you, that's a wonderful learning moment right there.
Yeah, I love that too.
That's great. Well, we're gonna do the bass giveaway here shortly, but before that, we're gonna take a question from the crowd, and we're gonna take one from the amazing and lovely Steve Jenkins, who is a fantastic bass player and a good friend of ours. He asks, does being a fan of the band or artist that you're producing help or hinder the process? And that can go for being a bass player, working with an artist as well.
I don't think there's any hindrance at all, really. I think it's just cool. I mean, if you're a producer and you're still doing it, you're probably music obsessive. And if you're really a music head, if you're like a true head and you really love music the way you did when you were 14, hopefully, fandom is just manifests as a producer as dedication and interest.
It's thrilling, right? Sometimes it's just thrilling to be working with someone that that you sat in your bedroom listening to. And
I love being a fan. I mean, it's really interesting because it's living in LA when maybe someone you haven't met, but you're just so inspired by their music and you see them in real life, and I think it's as long as I don't geek out too much, I really try to think of some way to go up and very respectfully say, wow, you've, inspired me so much. About 50-50, percent of the time it goes well. Other times they just freak out and call security, but, it's fun. I mean, Justin, you said it. It's the reason why we love.
Lost you.
Froze.
Oh, we lost you there, bro.
But that's the vibe. That's the vibe. If you're not a music fan anymore, you really shouldn't be doing this job.
Yeah, I agree.
Absolutely.
I think for any for a musician too, playing on, you know, if you're playing on records and coming in as a session player, I think that it's such an essential thing, that kind of investment in the music that you're making, or what you're playing on, or what you know. I mean, that's one of the things. Also, just a short thing to say is that I think as a producer, you know, one of the big jobs that you have also is to create a situation where everybody who's playing feels that investment, and they're not just doing what they're told, or, you know, or getting through, or getting the thing done, or something like that. You know, I feel like, you know, I need to, it's something I think about quite a bit on some level, maybe subconsciously a lot of the time, but setting up a situation where people feel totally invested in what we're making. And that's obviously it's the way you get something that goes above just being correct, or being just good enough or something.
Mark's back. Hi, Paul. You're back.
Yeah, Mark back.
I didn't get your reactions to what I said. That was a horrible moment to say something, and then please, I'm like, okay, what did I say?
It's okay. It was a good picture that froze.
On Larry's very skeptical kind of look, and I was like, shit, what did I say?
Oh no.
No, Larry always looks skeptical. That's okay.
Okay.
I apologize if I offended anybody with that very
it's just self-disgust, you know.
all right. Let's sorry to interrupt. It's living in Los Feliz.
That's totally good. Well, before we hop to another question, Jerry, do you want to give away this beautiful U-bass?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a name, Allison Knight. Congratulations.
Yeah.
You have a brand new U-bass. Yeah. So hit us up in the chat, and we'll connect you with the U-bass folks, and they'll send you one out.
Nice.
Yeah.
So we're kind of getting to the advice section, but I do feel bad that we didn't address why bass players make good producers. Maybe there's a way to touch on that before we ask you guys for your advice for aspiring producers.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know. It's such a it's a weird question sometimes to like think about and try and figure out what makes anybody a producer, and are there qualities in playing bass? I mean, I think one aspect of it might be that bass players are kind of, you know, it's largely a supportive role, and we have, you know, if you're good at what you do, you should have good instincts and harmony and rhythm, and you know, I don't know, I know for myself too, I was always the person calling up the other band members and trying to make sure they showed up on time for the rehearsals, and made sure everybody knew their parts, and, you know, I like sort of just got delegated that gig when I was in my, you know, in my garage playing with other musicians. So some of those aspects I think translate, but yeah, I don't know, I think it's just such a broad, to me, I feel like they're two different things, but there must be a reason why there's so many bass players and that go on to be producers, and, you know, a multitude of reasons.
I think that's the best answer. That's a great answer for that, Mike. Really good.
I mean, for me, I mean, of course, I'm sure there are a million different answers to this question, but it feels to me like, as a bass player, if you reduce it to a very simple situation, you're sort of at the fulcrum of things in a sense musically, in that you're sort of, you're setting things up, you know, you're setting along with the drums, you're setting up the foundation that the structure is going to sit upon in most cases. And I think that, of course, there's going to be a million exceptions to this, but you're also sort of playing, you're playing off the vocal, you're listening to how the vocal's tying into things groove wise. And, you know, so I think it takes, it requires a lot of the same skills that you have to use as a producer to be a good bass player. You have to have a sense of architecture in a certain way that that perhaps coming at it from having a background in another instrument you might not necessarily have. And I mean, these are generalities, but I think that there's something about that might you know, overall sort of give someone a predilection towards listening in this kind of architectural way that you have to as a producer, I think.
I like drawing the comparison to architecture. Like, our bass player is inherently good at interior design. Feng shui.
Or are they inherently good at architecture?
Right. Hey, there you go. But for me, like, what I thought of, the first thing that came to mind is like try to figure out what sets you apart, and, you know, like, do study all music, like, learn, be a student of music, but then find what your expertise is. You know, and sometimes it takes a while to find that. And that could come from being in a band. And like, for me, like, I came from the bandstand to the studio just through my relationships with the artist. I had been an MD for a while, and then the relationship with the artist, then we started writing on the road. We got tight, and then he gave me the opportunity to produce his record. And that was sort of like a foot in the door. And I think if you're diligent and you practice and you're patient and you take production as a practice, things will come and fall into place. As long as you're prolific and you're aware, you don't necessarily have to put so much pressure on yourself, because it's kind of, for me, like, I'm still building. And like, as a young musician, I would see other producers with their home studios or their, you know, they got their $20,000 desks and so much gear. It's intimidating. It's like, how do you get to that point? And I think if you take it as a practice and you keep just being prolific, not trying to reinvent the wheel, not trying to create a new style of music, don't set such high hopes for yourself, or like goals that are like out of reach, unattainable. Just keep it as a practice, and I think things will fall into place.
Yeah, anyone else have kind of recommendations for young musicians who are aspiring to be producers? Any thoughts on that?
I'll just quickly say it's important to not presume that you need like a room full of gear, because obviously that model is outmoded and has been for 20 years or something. And also that being a producer is really just an assumption of a role. It doesn't require like a resume. You just start. You have to begin. And like Stu was saying, it's also really important to find something that you can do. Find something that's attainable. Find something that is within reach. Start there. It's vital not to overextend yourself and set yourself up for loss or failure. It's very important to give yourself the opportunity to have some kind of small successes as you start.
Yeah, I totally agree in the sense that, you know, my main focus coming up was just to be the best bass player, the best version of what I had in my head of what I wanted to sound like. And that's all I kept focusing on. And I think as I started to realize what a producer did and what happens in studios or what people could do in their bedrooms, you know, making music, I became intrigued by that. And I think my reputation as a bass player is what allowed some people in the earliest days to trust me to kind of come in and assume that role of a producer to kind of help, you know, facilitate. I think they kind of figured, well, if he's good at bass, you know, maybe, you know, he definitely is dedicated to some, you know, to the craft of playing an instrument. And so, you know, maybe they kind of looked at that as a way of, you know, translating it as someone who can kind of help them record their music, you know. So I just focused on being, you know, a great musician first and foremost. And then I think that kind of opened up the doors to having people trust me with the music that they wanted to create.
I think that remembering simple issues is important. Like, you know, what are we trying to do when we make records? You know, what are you trying to do? What are you going to achieve? You know, what is going to make you successful? And to my mind, at least this is the path that I've chosen. It's making something that is going to make someone feel something, feel like intensely, and that can guide you through a lot of. I mean, that metaphor can guide you through a million different decisions, and steer you away from a lot of bad decisions. If you remember that you know, you're trying to make something that's going to change people inside, change the way they feel, change the way they think, that during those moments when they're listening to this record, and I think that this idea of curiosity to me is sort of, it's like the Bible to the thing, you know, holding on to your curiosity, and at the same time also not getting too negatively analytical about yourself, and remembering that we all screw up, and we all have days when we have the grand plan of how the masterpiece is going to come together, and then realize that all that wonderful design that you had in your head was wrong, you know, and you got to start again.
Not today. Today it's not going to happen, but maybe tomorrow.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And you might hear things completely different tomorrow, right? I mean, sometimes your ears just change and you're hearing something, and that happens to me. Does that happen to you guys?
Oh yeah, all the time.
Yeah.
There's plenty of times where I'll wake up in the morning and imagine what I thought I was hearing last night, and completely hear it in a new way the next day. And you know, it's like, all right, I can't wait to get to the studio to solve that problem that I was freaking out over yesterday.
Yeah, and I you know, now I know. Okay, stop. just stop and go. You know, do something else, and you know. Oh, I know. There was one other thing I wanted to mention is active listening. You know, like when you listen to records or watch films or anything, keeping track. You know, paying attention to. Oh wow! Listen to how that thing was built. You know, listen to the way that, you know, and putting that away. I mean, I think most of us do that anyhow, but that's so important, you know, because I can't even begin to make a list of the times. You know, it happens all the time where I'll be in a situation, I'll think of a film, and I'll think of the way a series of edits happened or something, and it translates, you know. sorry if that sounds too abstract.
No.
No, that's perfect. Well, we're gonna start rounding this up. We could talk all night, of course, with you guys and on the topic. So we're gonna just do a couple of quick fire questions that each of you will have an opportunity to answer. One of them being, what is one piece of gear as a producer that you always want in the studio with you when you're going into a session? Just one definitive thing that is your kind of trusty piece. Mike.
I don't know.
Yeah,
know.
man. That's such a hard thing to try and figure. I guess it depends on what I'm doing on any given day. I guess, yeah, my glasses, because I can't really see that well. I got to make sure I bring my glasses so that I can actually see what I'm looking at. And but no, I mean, you know, I don't like. It's such a tough one, man. I mean, there isn't one particular thing that I think just solves all of your problems by having. So that's a tough one to answer. I'm sorry.
I like to have like my brass knuckles and a cat of nine tails.
Yeah. Whoa.
My iPhone, I guess, you know, that helps.
Yeah. Technology doesn't hurt sometimes. It can be, I'll have to say that just having the sketch pad of my laptop will kind of either convince me that was a terrible idea, or maybe I should press into this a little more. So, but
I go back to the DI thing. I mean, for me, as if I think of the bass player job, it's like if you come in and some studios just have these kind of very adequate DIs, but they're just, I mean, it can really, I think it really helps to bring a DI or two DIs, whatever, whatever, but bring something in that respect that serves you well, and for me that's kind of if you're going to try and find a through line,
Stu?
Do you have a favorite ID or a DI, Larry? You can think of one off the top.
I have one that I've had for a long time that I love. It's called the Evil Twin.
That's
Oh, yeah.
I love my Evil Twin. Those are fabulous. You can't find those anywhere.
I just love the way I don't know technically exactly why, but it's just a great tube
an
DI.
Amazing box. I wish
Best DI I've ever heard. Evil Twin. Yep.
Yeah, I love it. That's just the best.
I mean, just having something like that when you go into something, rather than a Countryman or one of the when I see those things like Countryman.
Yeah, that's for stage.
Stu, you have an answer for that?
I love that. I love bringing DIs, like a couple to bring to a session. But I think what comes to mind is the bass that's behind me here. This guy with the labella flats on there. I mean, this bass in particular has an extraordinary amount of low end that's clear and just always like kind of like everybody's like, oh, when I'm playing, especially in like hip hop sessions or something like that. And doesn't necessarily call for that bass. The sessions don't necessarily call for that bass, but if I'm going to think of a secret weapon, it's definitely that one. It was made by this guy Matisyahu, who now works at Labella. He's the guy that makes all the Elizondo basses.
Oh wow, yeah.
So this is an Atelier Z from 2000.
Wow.
So it's about 20 years old. He made it. He left the company and then moved to New York and started building for Labella and made the Elizondo basses. His name is Matisyahu. I would definitely check him out. So now, like, to find that bass, I think it would be very difficult to find the ones that he made, because I actually got a replica made, one that he didn't make, and it is a little different. But But now, so if it's not that bass, it's going to be the other basses that he makes, and I have one with Olento that he made that's more of a P bass.
Very nice.
What are we looking at there, Mark?
It's, you remember the Universal Audio 610s?
Oh, yeah.
So it's a mic pre, but I gave it to this guy in LA and he changed the T. He went on a rave about, he goes, you know, if you swap the tubes in the transformer, it'll sound really good. And I was like crazy enough to say, okay, you know, check it out. I dug the knobs. I'm really impressed, and I love to be able to kind of push it depending on, you know, if you take a lot of basses, they all kind of want a little different sort of punishment. And it's been really between the Evil Twin and this is a preamp, so you can go straight into whatever their converters or whatever, but I'm always surprised at the welcome reception I get from, you know, people just always go, wow, what is that? And I go, it's, you know, I think you can get them everywhere, but it's been a really great versatile box, and I just put a couple $100 into it and kind of upgraded the parts, but that's, you know, an option. Definitely very cool.
That's great, man. And one final one before we let you guys go. Figurative gun to your head. If you could work with any artist, alive or dead or band, who would it be?
Bjork.
Oh,
Good answer.
9 Inch Nails.
Ooh.
Alive or dead?
Yeah. Yep.
Oh, well, the Beatles.
Yeah, good. Wow, good.
Can't go wrong with that.
No.
Yeah.
That's the answer, right? Isn't that the one?
Yeah, I mean, you know, yeah.
For me, it might be something like the Clash in their prime.
Mm.
Mm.
Oh, yeah.
I'll go random and say XTC, although Colin Moulding is probably one of my favorite bassists, and they're all healthy and well, I'm sure, but they left a big impression when I was really young. I was like, wow, those guys are coming up with crazy stuff. Do you remember that band?
Incredible.
Anybody remember XTC?
oh yeah.
Of
Yeah.
course.
Come
Yeah,
on.
I
I
love
own,
them.
of course.
I mean,
own all their
I
records.
remember when I was living in London, I asked a friend to introduce me to Colin Moulding because he was just always such an unconventional, you know, just his parts were just so crazy as a bassist. And you know, it was great. I met him and I said, so what's your approach? And he just looked at me like, he goes, I don't know how to play. That's my approach. He just goes, it's ignorance amplified by a pint of ale. And I'm like, wow. So anyway, I tried that technique. It doesn't really work, but it was fun, you know. But they're a great band, and it'd be fun to drop in on them.
Well, those are some great answers. Well, man, we want to thank so much our amazing panelists, such legendary producers and players. We have Larry Klein, Mark Browne, Stu Brooks, Mike Elizondo, and JMJ. Thank you guys so much. Big shout to Chris Jisi and Jerry Watts Jr. You can study with Mark and Jerry if you head over to lacm.edu. So go on over if you want to improve your stuff. And of course, for everything bass, go to bassmagazine.com and read about these fellas. And thank you guys all so much for joining us tonight. It's been a big pleasure.
You. Wow.
Thank
great.
you.
Been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Such a pleasure. Thank you.
Pleasure
Thanks,
to
everyone. Stay
talk with
safe.
you
Everyone
guys.
stay
Excellent, guys. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
All right.
Amazing.
Later, guys.
Bye.
All right.
See
See
ya.
ya.
Bye.
Over and out.
Over and out.
Bye, Grandpa.
All right.